各位觀眾，大家好，歡迎收睇新中國聯邦新聞。我哋係消滅邪惡中國共產黨嘅新中國人。今日係2023年6月15號星期四，而家係美東時間晚上11點。我係 Johnny，
我係 Karen。首先，我哋嚟關注幾則同爆料革命新中國聯邦相關嘅新聞資訊。繼6月6號嘅聽證會之後，新中國聯邦爆料革命嘅創始發起人郭文貴先生請求解除拒絕預審釋放令嘅動議再次被駁回。呢個結果完全係意料之中。共產黨從一開始就設計好呢個陷阱，原因就係想利用法律超限戰嚟打倒佢嘅頭號敵人郭文貴先生。郭文貴先生嘅預審釋放令被無理駁回。美東時間6月14號，曼哈頓美國第2巡迴上訴法院當日表示，郭文貴先生應繼續喺監獄裏面等待審判，而佢嘅審判係定喺2024年嘅4月進行。檢察官聲稱，郭文貴將所謂嘅部分欺騙所得用喺購買奢侈品，包括遊艇、豪車同豪宅，但呢啲物品嘅擁有者喺法律上並唔屬於郭先生，而且喺發起創立媒體公司、加密貨幣同其他企業投資項目之前就已經存在。郭先生當然對所有11項指控唔認罪，因為呢啲完全係子虛烏有嘅罪名，既冇人證亦冇物證，純粹係被中共武器化嘅美國司法部同驅使美國司法系統為中共服務嘅結果。該案件只有美國國會介入，先至會有正確嘅結果，因為郭先生嘅案件已經成為咗政治標的。美國國會需要以此嚟清理被中共藍金黃手段收買嘅賣美賊。值得慶幸嘅係，麥卡錫議長、桑托斯議員等美國嘅正義人士已經開始制定各種針對性嘅政策。而按照郭先生早前爆料嘅預料，今年嘅6、7、8月份情況可能會更加激烈。等我哋拭目以待。
我哋再嚟睇中共各方面嘅消息。據國際通訊 Courier International 週刊網站5月26號報導，受訂單減少影響，喺中共國原先僱用大量員工嘅工廠都正在搬遷同裁員。據專門研究社會運動嘅網站中國勞工通訊 CLB 報導，反對拖欠工資嘅罷工同抗議無償裁員嘅示威活動正在增加。中共國出口量暴跌引發罷工潮。據外國媒體報導，由於經濟低迷，迫使美國同歐洲削減對中共製造商品嘅訂單。世界第2大經濟體嘅出口同工廠生產出喺5月份大幅下滑。一位人權組織同經濟學家表示，中國工廠嘅罷工已飆升至7年嚟最高點，並且預計將會更加頻繁，因為全球整體需求疲軟，迫使出口商削減工人工資並關閉工廠。一啲工廠因此難以支付下崗工人嘅工資或遣散費，導致勞資糾紛激增。總部位於香港嘅權利組織中國勞工通訊 CLB 喺今年前5個月記錄咗超過140次全國工廠罷工，呢個係自2016年同期紀錄嘅313次以嚟嘅最高紀錄。該維權組織嘅數據主要基於社交媒體上報導嘅抗議活動，好多罷工集中喺廣東省同長三角洲呢啲製造業中心地帶，涉及出口商包括服裝、鞋類同印刷電路板工廠等等。工廠罷工可能成為中共嘅政治難題。中共經濟學家指出，企業正通過減薪同裁員嚟適應產能過剩嘅現實，但裁員同減薪可能成為不穩定嘅根源。
中共統治下嘅方方面面都有唔同嘅標準，但都只能係官員嘅講咗算。中共雙標傳統文化賽龍船。據場內新聞6月12號刊載，龍船比賽係中國歷史悠久嘅民族體育活動，寄託住中華民眾對國泰民安、風調雨順嘅美好願景， 弘揚中華民族團結拼搏、同舟共濟嘅精神。6月22號即將係端午節，而6月9號、10號呢兩日，浙江省瑞安市塘下鎮村民黃某同李某兩人分別組織村民進行划龍船迎端午嘅活動，結果被中共行政拘留。更荒誕嘅係，中共竟然默認凡係民間組織嘅龍船比賽，一律都屬於攤派、低俗、迷信、無罪嘅活動。而且早喺今年4月，瑞安市嘅地級中共政府就明確發布通知話，鑑於民間划龍船活動存在攤派、低俗、迷信、無罪等現象，2023年繼續喺瑞安市範圍內禁止民間划龍船活動。當地回應，民間划龍船係屬低俗迷信，要全面禁止。但係今年6月10號，中國南昌國際龍舟節開幕式卻喺江西南昌紅谷灘區九龍湖舉行。江西省委書記李鴻鈞宣布開幕並鳴槍發令，仲有江西省嘅一系列中共官員出席咗開幕式。百姓不禁要問，點解同係龍舟比賽，中共組織嘅同民間進行嘅卻被雙重標準嚟對待？
海鮮市場只係一個詭計，想引開對武漢實驗室嘅注意力。據外媒報導，美國前疾控中心主任 Robert Redfield 博士喺6月14號嘅訪談裏面指出，新冠病毒源自海鮮市場嘅講法係為咗將注意力從武漢病毒實驗室引開嘅詭計。根據美國國會通過嘅新冠病毒溯源法案，拜登政府應該喺2023年6月18號之前解密所有同新冠病毒有關嘅情報。而家距離呢個時間點已經越嚟越近。Robert Redfield 博士喺訪談裡面提到嘅武漢病毒實驗室3位0號病人，分別係胡斌、于平、朱岩。而之前最多嘅講法，武漢病毒實驗室嘅0號病人係黃燕玲。無論係黃燕玲定係胡斌、于平、朱岩，目前嘅媒體報導以及之前嘅美國國會嘅兩場關於新冠病毒溯源聽證會，都將新冠病毒嘅最早爆發時間點指向咗2019年嘅秋天。從2017年1月26號郭文貴先生開創爆料革命至今，世界正從當初嘅全面陷入中共滲透同欺騙嘅局面，到今日開始覺醒並開始聯合滅共。全人類所經歷嘅每一日都係為覺醒過程付出嘅代價。
New report says scientists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology conducting gain-of-function research were the first humans to contract COVID in the fall of 2019, just months before the outbreak of the virus that killed nearly 7 million people worldwide. Former CDC Director Dr. Robert Redfield, who was at the helm of the start of the pandemic, joins us now. So this is information that comes to us from Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi. They report that 3 of the very first people to come down with COVID worked at that Institute of Virology, including Ben Hu, who led the Institute's gain-of-function research and was a top student of the so-called Batwoman, Shi Zhenli. What do you think of these latest claims, Doctor?
You know, John, I think they're very important. As I've said for some time, I think the answer to the origin of COVID is going to come from the intelligence community. And I think hopefully next week there's going to be more intelligence released. There has been, I think, strong evidence that there was infections that occurred in the laboratory both in September and November. And we're hearing more specific from these reporters, which I suspect their information is grounded in truth. We'll have to see what the intelligence community releases next week.
Yeah, again, what you're referring to there is a report that was signed off on by President Biden a number of months ago. All of the intelligence regarding the origins of COVID and the Wuhan Institute of Virology is supposed to be declassified, including listing the names of all of the researchers who got sick. If people were getting sick in September, and as you pointed out later that fall in China, and this is 2019, before we had the first cases here, does that, and they came from the Institute, does that suggest that this idea of it originating naturally from the wet market is probably not the plausible cause for this pandemic?
Yeah, John, I've always felt that the wet market narrative was a roost to try to move attention away from the laboratory. I think if you really look critically and at the evidence that we have for spillover, other than some prominent individuals promoting it as what they believe happened, there is really no evidence to support spillover. But there is really growing evidence now that supports that this epidemic started in a laboratory, presumably the Wuhan Institute of Virology. There's also the CDC Virology Institute in Wuhan. Those are the two major laboratories that have been implicated as potentially being the source of this virus.
Earlier this year, when the Department of Energy came out and said it looks like it was a lab leak that was responsible, when the FBI said the same thing, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who had departed the NIH by that point, was asked about it. And he seemed to be rather dismissive of the whole idea of getting to the bottom of this. Listen to what he said.
Do you think we'll ever know how the pandemic originated?
Might not. It very well might not. We may not ever know. That's unfortunate, but that's the possibility that we might not ever know.
Now, I'm not asking you here to dump on a former colleague, but he was rather dismissive about the whole thing. And you would think if anybody really wanted to get to the bottom of how this whole thing started, it would be him, unless he doesn't want to know.
Yeah, John, you know, Tony and I have been friends for a long time, but I'm very disappointed in how he's responded to this. Largely, I think it's grounded in his advocacy for gain-of-function research. I think you know he's a strong advocate for gain-of-function research, and I'm a strong advocate for a moratorium on gain-of-function research. The investigative report that you're just talking about suggests that these three scientists were the initial infections in November, although I think there was evidence for infections back in early September also. But it's of note that they were the key scientists that were leading the gain-of-function research in that laboratory.
So a paper that was published back in the fall of 2020 highlighted the importance of finding out how COVID originated. It said in part, quote, understanding how COVID-19 emerged is a critical point on a steep learning curve we must quickly master. As we face the mounting deaths and societal upheavals of the COVID-19 pandemic, we must not lose sight of how this pandemic began, how and why we missed the warning signs, and what we can do to prevent it from happening again and again. That was written when the prevailing theory was that it came out of a wet market. But it speaks to the importance of if you're not curious, if you're not diligent, if you don't get to the bottom of this, you're doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest disappointments, and I've said this publicly before, is I was a strong advocate in January of 2020 that NIH should lead a scientific investigation into the two hypotheses, spillover and laboratory leak. And unfortunately, very rapidly, what happened in January 31st, February 1st, there was a movement to coalesce around a single narrative, which was that this was a natural spillover event. That's the only hypothesis that really should be entertained. People like me that thought it may be a lab leak were classified as conspiratorial. And I tried to argue then that that whole approach was antithetical to science, because what science normally does is foster rigorous debate. And we have a high degree of confidence that science will eventually figure out the truth. Now I'm of the view that we're going to get to the answer. And I do agree with that article. Getting to the answer is critical, because in order for to have the energy that we're going to need as a society and a world, I think to put limitations on gain of function research, we need to understand that it is most likely the gain of function research led to this pandemic. And I've said before that I do believe the great pandemic is coming. It's going to be a bird flu pandemic, and I do believe it's likely to come from gain of function research or bioterrorism. And our best defense against that pandemic is going to be to curtail gain of function research.
Well, if we didn't have rigorous scientific debate, we would still think that the sun orbits around the Earth. Dr. Redfield, it's always great to get your take on things. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John. God bless. Bye-bye.
跟住落嚟，我哋再嚟關注兩則國際方面嘅新聞。中共從未尊重過人嘅生命，而係將中國老百姓視為人礦，可以任意挖掘，不斷開採。世界上能夠由政府支持同參與器官買賣嘅，亦只有中共呢個邪惡政權。中共嘅罪惡一定會被審判。英國法庭終審，中共活摘人體器官反人類罪成立。早喺2019年6月17號，英國獨立人民法庭喺倫敦舉行咗終審判決，裁定中共犯反人類罪行。西方媒體對此進行咗現場報導。法庭陪審團一致認定，有確鑿嘅證據表明，中共強摘良心犯人器官一事屬實。該法庭喺上年12月同今年4月分別舉行咗2次聽證會，超過50幾名證人出席。大法官傑弗里尼斯爵士表示，佢哋曾邀請中方代表出席，但最後冇收到任何回覆。陪審團成員一致認為，中共活摘器官嘅罪行已經有幾十年。尼斯爵士曾負責對前南斯拉夫總統米洛舍維奇嘅起訴。佢喺今次判決書嘅最後提到，中共此舉屬於國家犯罪行為。楊安妮係一名法輪功學員，佢本人出席咗聽證會，講述佢喺關押期間受到中共嘅酷刑折磨同不明體檢嘅經歷。加拿大外交部亞太司前司長 David Kilger 表示，中共咁野蠻嘅殺人、任意索取、販賣他人臟器，比納粹更加殘忍。參與過奧喜農場直播嘅前外科醫生安華托蒂表示，共同阻止呢種野蠻行徑係文明國家嘅首要任務。
我哋再嚟睇下量子計算方面嘅突破性發展。IBM 量子電腦實現計算里程碑。據外媒報導， IBM 進行嘅研究展示咗量子計算領域取得顯著進步。通過喺 IBM Eagles 量子處理器上模擬磁性材料嘅行為，科學家展示咗克服量子雜訊並獲得可靠計算結果嘅能力。IBM 突破性嘅錯誤減少技術直接解決咗呢個問題。通過實施複雜嘅糾錯方法，研究團隊成功減輕咗量子雜訊嘅影響，令量子處理器能夠產生可靠同準確嘅結果。呢一成就為以前使用經典計算方法無法實現嘅更大規模量子計算鋪平咗道路。呢一里程碑嘅影響係深遠嘅。喺量子處理器上模擬磁性材料行為嘅能力，為今年稍後嘅時間會推出目前全球最強大嘅處理器，即1121量子比特嘅 Condor 晶片定下堅實嘅基礎。IBM 量子技術工作負責人表示，為咗實現到2033年構建10萬個量子比特嘅機器嘅長期目標，即機器可執行完全糾錯嘅計法，研究人員仲需要解決大量嘅工程問題。IBM 始終喺處理量子計算研發嘅係前沿，憑着呢一突破，佢哋為該領域最先進嘅技術樹立咗標杆，突破咗量子計算嘅可能性界限。該實驗結果將會有助量子計算嘅持續進步， 並為呢項變革性嘅技術嘅未來創新鋪平咗道路。
喺國際形勢方面，俄羅斯威脅摧毀歐美海底電纜。據外國媒體報道，俄羅斯總統普京嘅手下梅德韋傑夫星期三喺講到係西方嘅同謀者炸毀咗北溪工程時話，莫斯科冇理由唔破壞敵人嘅海底電纜。現任俄羅斯國家安全委員會副主席嘅梅德韋傑夫喺佢 Telegram 賬號上話，佢哋要對已經被證明係由西方國家同盟炸毀嘅北溪工程管道進行報復。佢哋冇嘢可以被限制，包括道德層面，冇任何理由可以阻止佢哋去破壞佢哋敵人嘅海底電纜。呢個海底電纜貫穿世界各大洋，係全球通訊嘅大動脈。北約軍事同盟情報主任5月份警告話，俄羅斯可能會破壞海底電纜嚟懲罰西方國家支持烏克蘭。上年9月26號發生喺波羅的海嘅天然氣管道壓力驟降，以及地震學家測出嘅爆炸波，引起咗大眾對於係邊個破壞咗俄羅斯最重要嘅能源走廊之一北溪工程管道嘅猜測。目前仲唔清楚北溪工程管道究竟發生咗乜嘢，而呢個工程項目耗資數十億美元，可以將俄羅斯嘅天然氣輸向德國。最後，我哋重申，中國共產黨係全世界災難嘅根源，只有消滅中國共產黨，先至能夠拯救全人類。感謝大家收睇呢次新中國聯邦新聞，我哋下次再會。
我哋下次再會。
The noise of gunfire rose from all over the center of Peking.
Doing too much. 10 minutes clear. Why? Why? I think this is my duty.
不是什么神秘人物，也不是什么富翁，这个都是过去媒体不了解、不知道嘛。